are listening to another episode of the Future Money podcast presented by the Interledger Foundation, where we invite people of all backgrounds and disciplines to imagine what a financially inclusive future might be. I'm Lawel Karama, and today we're in conversation with Larissa Lampersad and Kokayi, co-founders of Kumquat, a design consultancy dedicated to financial inclusion and innovation across Africa. In this conversation, we explore the role of cultural relevance, simplicity, and ethical fintech solutions in shaping impactful financial services. Stay tuned for an insightful discussion on the evolving landscape of digital finance and the power of design in driving meaningful change. Welcome to the Future Money podcast. I'm so happy to have you guys here.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Larissa. I'm a co-founder and director of Kumquat along with Kokayi, and I used to lead product design and user experience at Stitch. I worked at Lucky Beard, at Superbalist, old startups based in South Africa, and I started off studying computer science, aiming to be a developer, but then eventually moved into the design space because I realized that was a really great way to strategically create the future that I wanted to see. And I'm based in Cape Town with Kokayi now, and with Kumquat, we're creating positive change through helping startups that we believe are going to make the future a little bit better.
Hi, I'm Kokayi. I'm originally American, but I live in South Africa now in the beautiful city of Cape Town. But for the past 10 years, I've been living in Africa in a number of different countries, from Tanzania to Egypt to Kenya, and now finally South Africa. Originally, my career started out in film, working at DreamWorks in the film industry as an animator before moving on to building a financial literacy curriculum and moving into fintech when I was working in Nairobi. Since then, I've had a wild adventure, series of adventures, before finally landing in and starting Kumquat with Larissa.
Oh, this is amazing. Thank you. So, how did the two of you meet? And what inspired you to create this initiative?
One of my favorite things about living on the continent and being in the industry is that the startup industry and the startup bubble is generally quite small. So I started my fintech and financial inclusion journey in Nairobi before then moving to South Africa, working with companies like Chipper Cash, IDO. While I was with Chipper, my fiance, who also works in the fintech space, was colleagues with Larissa. And that's actually how she and I met, because Chipper Cash and Stitch were partners. We were both designers. Lori was the lead product designer, and I was a design director at Chipper Cash. We had a lot of similar interests, but then I think most importantly, we had a lot of shared values on what we believe the world should look like and how it should empower minorities, people of color, and had a very similar vision of what equitable financial inclusion looked like.
Yeah, we met and we knew each other for a little while. And then around the same time, we'd both left our previous companies, Chipper Cash and Stitch, and we were looking for ways to create really meaningful change that resonated with our values. And I dare anyone to talk to Kokayi for 5 minutes and not get inspired about what the future could look like. So we would work together from a co-working space. And one day we realized we have such aligned goals, such aligned values, such an aligned vision for the future of Africa, the global majority, and the world. And we said, why not? What's the worst that could happen if we decided to pool our ideas, our resources, and our ways of thinking to, apply our values to the world and how we want it to turn out.
So can you explain to me a bit more where the name Kumquat came from?
We were thinking about names, brainstorming for a little while. And at the time, my grandmother, who I love dearly, was talking a lot about kumquat pickle. It's a very common condiment that's accompanying curries. I'm South African Indian, and my grandmother was talking about it pretty much daily. And the idea came into my head. I was like, what about kumquat? And Kokayi latched onto that because she also has a personal attachment to that word.
Yeah, so kumquats are fruits that originate from the Canton region of China. So Canton, Hong Kong area. So as a child, I grew up eating a lot of kumquats. And they're also, well, for those of you who don't know, a kumquat is a very tiny little citrus fruit, maybe, I don't know, the height of your thumb or smaller. I have a small thumb, so the height of your thumb. And then it also means in Chinese, it's jingji, which means golden orange. So a lot of times when you have Chinese New Year, people will actually have kumquats because it is a symbol of wealth, of prosperity, and of good luck because it is like a little golden fruit. It's got a very piquant taste to it. It's like sour and sweet and tangy. But because Lori and I have this shared history of, she grew up eating pickled kumquats, I have this Cantonese heritage, and apparently it's also quite fairly common in the south of Italy where I used to live as well. They call it chinotos. So it just became this fruit that we felt, we loved the sound of it. We loved how it's a unique word and it's hard to associate and attach a stereotype to it.
True.
Right. So I had some other names like Pink Rhino and like other boring names, but all of us just landed on Kumquat because I think it really encapsulated this unique brand that we wanted to build around ourselves of, a design consultancy, but also gave us enough flexibility to evolve should we choose to.
Yeah, I think the kumquat itself is also like very zesty and bright and interesting and not well known. And I think that we resonated quite a lot with that when we were starting. We had a lot of ideas. We were a little bit unique and zesty and maybe pushed things a little bit further. And we also were not well known, and we related to that quite a lot.
So, what I appreciate about what you both mentioned is your strong focus on the future. That naturally leads me to my next question. How do you believe you are shaping the future of fintech and financial inclusion?
I think we bring a lot of creativity to the table, but also just, I think we love to set a goal and power through things. And generally, our goal has something to do with, it's tied to the vision of the world that we really believe in. So, again, like equitable access to finance, good understanding of financial systems, borrowing, lending, etc. Like, how do we create responsible borrowers and lenders, especially in an area where financial inclusion is so diverse and there can be such gaps there. But specifically as women, I think women also have a tendency to be a bit more inclusive and also intentional in thinking through, how do these products affect the communities around us? How do they bring in the community? How do we shape a community for the better using our skill sets, using our unique experiences? So I think that's something that I really appreciate about Lauricia and myself, and that we bring together these really unique perspectives and approaches, and also something that's predominantly a male industry, and even in Africa, a white, light-skinned, male-dominated industry. And I know that it's ironic as Lauricia and I are lighter skinned female co-founders on a predominantly dark skinned continent, but that's something that we really try and be intentional about, understanding that we both come from a place of privilege. Specifically for myself as an American, a foreigner on the continent, there's a lot of things that are just unfairly advantaged towards someone who looks like me. And that's something that we really try and counter against, whether in our clients, the people that we hire. The question that we always go back to as a women-led venture in financial inclusion is how are we leveraging our privilege to also include and build up the rest of the continent so that one day, maybe 20, 30 years from now, most of the people leading the continent will not look like people like us. They will look like people who belong to this land.
In your design practice, have you noticed any key differences in your approach? I'm particularly curious about how your perspective contrasts with the expectations or proposals from a traditionally male dominated space. Not necessarily in terms of leveraging your privilege, but rather how your approach to branding or design might differ from what is typically suggested in those meetings.
I think there is value in representation and diversity. So people often see it as tokenization, like let's just get one of everyone in the room so that we cover all our bases. But that's not what it is. I think innovation comes out of a amalgamation of different perspectives. So just by the virtue of especially Kay's perspective as an American who's lived and immersed herself in so many African countries and like really delve deep into cultures and try to like make a difference in each of these places. And in my experience coming from South Africa, where there is a very unique history of prejudice, right, with apartheid, there are a lot of unique perspectives we bring to it. So, for example, when you give a job to a person of color who is more marginalized and disadvantaged, they're likely going to be supporting 10 people instead of supporting, just their spouse and their child. And that's a perspective that I've grown up with. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it with my family and people around me, and I can see how one breadwinner in a family is not just affecting, that little nuclear object. It's actually affecting an entire community and lifting a community up. So that's just something that is a lived experience with us. And when we bring those perspectives into the room, sometimes they are, I think we're very intentional with our clients and who we work with. So we work with gems of people. I don't think we've ever, in our experience of Kumquat, worked with people who aren't open and inviting our perspectives. But sometimes, I've had experiences in the past where I'm bringing up a perspective that doesn't fit into a very narrow view, because the world was designed and built for certain people, and we need that diversity of thought. So sometimes it's accepted, sometimes it's not. But I think in recent years, especially with Kumquat, I found that people are really open to understanding how unique perspectives and that like diversity of information allows you to be even more innovative. Necessity drives innovation, and I think that's what we're really bringing to our clients.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree that necessity drives innovation. In addition, the rich diversity of cultures across the African continent adds another layer of complexity and also opportunity. It's a dynamic space where businesses must not only adapt but also learn from these cultural differences. With that in mind, the African fintech sector is particularly exciting because of its rapid evolution and unique challenges. How do you see your organization, Conquat, contribute to this movement? And what impact do you hope to have?
So, as a design consultancy, I mean, I guess I can speak about it from my own personal experience, but then also from Kumquat as a design consultancy and how, our company is basically built off of our experiences and the way that we see the world. So, one of the reasons why I love living on this continent, whether it's Cape Town, Johannesburg, Nairobi, Cairo, is that Africa has one of the fastest growing mobile banking and fintech ecosystems in the world, right? So, I mean, everyone listening to this podcast probably knows about M-Pesa, other digital wallets. I mean, South Africa as well. There's just so many different ways that we've learned to leapfrog, and overcome these infrastructural barriers. And I remember it's not the case anymore since Apple Pay came out, but as an American, I used to, having lived in Nairobi, and then whenever I went back to the States, I would be very frustrated because when I was going out or running errands, when I was living in Kenya, all I needed were my keys and my phone. I didn't need my credit
Mhm.
card. I didn't need cash. I
Yeah.
didn't need anything else. And it was a point of frustration, feeling like this is so strange that I'm going from Nairobi back to a quote unquote developed country, but I still need to carry all of these things with me. So obviously, at this point, now we've moved past that with Apple Pay and everything. But I think the rise of M-Pesa just goes to show how Africa can be and is rising in all of these different technologies and really being such an innovative continent, even though credit isn't always due to it.
Mhm.
And when it comes to Kumquat specifically, because the superpower of designers is that we know naturally how to empathize with other people. We are more empathetic. We think about people a lot. We think about behaviors. So it comes a lot more easily to us than someone who, I don't know, maybe generalizing here, but maybe is more well versed in finances or revenue or accounting, or in building and developing pieces of technology, right? Because designers inherently will think about what are the universal sensory languages that we can use to communicate, and what are the different types of behaviors that one person might be enticed to act in if they see a specific type of screen, if they see a specific type of have a specific type of haptics interaction. And then when you expand that to a continent that has I think it's 53 different states, different countries in Africa now. When you have so many diverse people groups and tribes and languages, it really takes a designer's eye to really think about how might this one person interact with an application? How might a Maasai farmer or a Maasai nomadic herder interact with an application and express or understand an icon versus myself, someone who's American and used to, I don't know, different types of applications, right? Would a phone icon relate to him in the same way that it would relate to me? Does that mean call? Does that mean like phone booth? For some people, phone means also payment. So it takes a designer to really dig deep into these questions. So a lot of things that we're seeing is that a lot of people are skipping, over a lot of these assumptions and assuming that designing for the continents is really easy and you can take something that you've learned from Rwanda, for example, and apply it to Kenya or Tanzania. But even within those regions, there's so many different nuances, and it takes someone to really be able to ask the right questions. So that's what we're here for, to ask those questions and to provide a main character for different teams to think about and to build products and solutions around.
Yeah, 100%. If I had to sum it up, I would say our role as designers in this digital financial inclusion space is to champion the user, to champion what's best for them, right? Trust, simplicity, accessibility, things that they need, and think innovatively about how we can design things differently. We don't necessarily need to copy all the same systems and solutions from the West. So, for example, there are options where a lot of people in South Africa are thin filed, which means they don't really have a great credit score because they don't have access to these systems. And so we will work with companies that are thinking about how do we aggregate data to do alternative risk scoring. For example, Akiba Digital, a company we've talked to a lot, and that is how we try and apply our design mindset to the digital financial inclusion movement. It's saying, what are the other ways we can do things to replicate how people want to live in Africa? A lot of communities in the global south are really community based, trust based. How do we replicate that in digital interactions rather than just copying and mimicking the systems that are working for the West? There are lots of differences in cultures, like Kay said, but also differences in values in ways of interacting around something as sensitive as money and finances. There is a lot of room for innovation, and that's where Kumquat comes in. We go in and we ask the user, how do you do things? How do you want to do things? How do you want to pay the person on the corner? What value does money have for you, and what role does it play in your life, and how do we translate that into a digital experience?
Oh, that's very beautifully said. It really highlights the critical role you play in empowering consumers, not just as facilitators of financial inclusion, but also as translators and advocates, ensuring that the people are both protected but also properly served by these institutions. I find it particularly interesting how Kumquat focus on designing for trust, simplicity, and accessibility rather than simply copying Western systems. Your approach when working with companies to explore alternative risk scoring and designing solutions that reflect the trust-based, community-oriented nature of financial interactions in Africa seems essential in ensuring real impact. Given this responsibility, how do you see your work influencing the broader landscape of consumer empowerment in fintech? And how do you balance the need for innovation with maintaining ethical and user-centric design?
We take that so seriously. When you say how we protect people, when we're bringing marginalized groups into the digital financial ecosystem, it's not just about getting uptake, getting people into the system. It's also a responsibility of making sure that we're bringing marginalized people into the system, that we embed protection for them, protective policies to prevent, predatory rates that they might be subject to embed financial literacy into the user flows so that they are aware of what's happening when they click yes or no. These are people, when we're talking about digital financial inclusion, we're talking about bringing people who are not the most savvy in the space into a space that is increasingly complex. So we take that responsibility so seriously, and that's why we also champion fintechs and solutions that drive that sort of financial inclusion in an ethical way. And that's where user experience design comes in, because we can reinforce security, transparency, ease of use, and make sure that we're not only making it easier for people to come into the space, but that when they do, they are empowered, protected, and able to live life with dignity.
I really want to ask this question because we've already touched on it, but I want to make sure we fully cover it. What does digital financial inclusion mean to you? Not just as a designer, but also as a user, an advocate, and as somebody or someone living with these communities. With all of these experiences you both have and are translating into your work, how do you personally define and engage with financial inclusion?
For me, I think the simple answer is lowering barriers to financial tools through better design and accessibility, whether digital or not. But especially in the African space, I think digital tools have that potential to really help us leapfrog as a society, right? So, either through mobile applications or SMS, SMS, USSD applications, we've seen that a lot with M-Pesa. So, thinking creatively around how to empower underserved communities so that they can really participate in the digital financial economy. But then, most importantly, I think also have an educated way to think about managing their finances and building a healthy financial future for
Mhm.
themselves. And sometimes I think the reason why digital financial inclusion feels so exciting for me is because often on this continent, there's also, to be able to reach that digital financial inclusion piece, there's a huge relationship and a communal aspect to it first. That almost feels like a gateway where a lot of times you have to earn the trust of the community first before you come in with any digital tools or any digital solutions. And I'll give an example of a project that we worked on when we were at IDO, which is that we wanted to build a program to be able to help these girls think more critically and to be able to empower them to control more of their financial future. But instead of just building out a program from the get go of economic empowerment, what we realized that we had to do, and we only uncovered this after a series of interviews, is that the people who were gatekeeping them and the people who were leading this community, they were actually the true gatekeepers of the solution that we were building for these women. So, in order to reach these women, we actually had to gain the trust and the respect first of their community leaders, of either their parents if they weren't married, or their husbands if they were married. Because without adhering and respecting to those community traditions, there was just no way we were going to come in with any type of solution, because immediately that would be met with resistance, with
Mhm.
hesitation, distrust of another foreign entity coming for who knows what. And now they're trying to talk to my wife, my sister, my daughter, right? And it's a really interesting conversation because this is also such a nuanced discussion around where is it appropriate to input our own values, right? And where is it better for us actually just to take the position of a learner and learn about this community, even though we may not agree with everything. But
Mhm.
how do we best benefit the end user? And I think we'll find that for digital financial inclusion on the continent, there are so many other human nuances and complexities that we have to respect more so than, in more developed markets where everything has become digitized.
To me, digital financial inclusion is, or should be, the empowering of a community to live with dignity. And that sounds really strange because I haven't used the words digital or financial or inclusion in that explanation. But as the world becomes increasingly digital and technologically based, we need to allow people to get access to new knowledge, to interact with companies and people across the globe and be brought into this global ecosystem. But we also want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is community oriented and elevates an entire community. And that means that we need to make digital financial inclusion a means of replicating the best of people's ways of living right now and translate that into a digital experience. And so maybe that means doing something slightly differently. Like in South Africa, we have Stokvels. So it's a club of 12 or more people, and they create their own rotating credit union or a savings scheme. In Kenya, there are SACCOs. So, where banks might make money for stockholders, they don't make money for their depositors necessarily. SACCOs serve their member owners. Each member is an owner. And so they give each other lower loan rates, higher deposit rates, and they're doing things in ways that replicate the way they want to live in community. And so for me, digital financial inclusion isn't allowing one person to succeed and become successful and then leave the door open behind them. It's about empowering an entire layer of a community to then be able to participate in the global economy without losing what makes their community work for them.
What's up, listeners? I'm Aisha Ware, Program Manager at the Interledger Foundation, and we've got something exciting for you. I recently collaborated with Grammy Award-nominated mixed media artist Carolyn Malachi, who teaches a course on advanced audio production at Howard University. The course challenges students to develop amazing audio projects, including film scores, audiobooks, and, of course, podcasts. For the next few episodes of the Future Money podcast, we'll be sharing an exclusive audio piece about Interledger, produced and edited by one of Carolyn's students. Please enjoy this sample, created by Lauren Smith.
Future Money empowers people to envision a better financial future. We foster conversations about digital financial services and examine the impact they have on our lives. Through our discussions, we explore what it means to be included or excluded from access to financial services, and we strive to identify ways to create a more equitable financial system. Our platform brings together diverse perspectives from global artists to community innovators to generate new ideas and solutions for a brighter financial future. Future Money is for everyone who wants to understand the current financial systems and create a more just and inclusive future for all. Get ready to experience the future of money with the Interledger Foundation. To discover more about the next-gen financial ecosystem, visit interledger.org/futuremoney. Don't miss out on this game-changing opportunity.
I am amazed by the remarkably talented students at Howard University. Let me tell you, I've seen firsthand how Carolyn's course has equipped them with the practical skills and real-world experience needed to excel in the audio industry, and I cannot wait to see what they all do next. Now back to the show.
I recently heard someone describe financial participation for marginalized communities as something that should be experienced gracefully, something that is a natural part of existence rather than a struggle. This makes me curious about Kumquat's approach. Have you implemented any design strategies that specifically enhance financial services for underserved communities? Given that financial inclusion should not only provide access but also uphold dignity and agency, how has your organization tackled these themes in practice?
We could talk about how we've applied our design thinking and strategy to different projects. So, for example, one of our clients, Fixa, is working on creating financial opportunities for blue-collar workers who often work in transitional jobs in construction, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, etc. And they're unempowered by default because they don't have work histories, they don't have resumes, they show up at the job site, get a job, get paid. And sometimes if, the job site manager disappears for that afternoon, they're stuck and they're not paid. And there's a lack of power, there's a power disparity there. And so that's how digital interventions can actually protect workers, protect blue collar workers, especially in this use case. And so design thinking and strategy is saying, okay, what do these workers need to know? Do they need a fancy app? Probably not. They might just need a USSD notification that they have been disbursed X amount. Maybe what they need is to be allowed to get an advance on their salary or a portion of their salary to pay for things because they can't wait until the end of the project. So, design thinking and strategy is an ethos of taking a step back and saying, if we were to wipe the slate clean, what is the best way to design this for the user? What would make their lives the easiest? And so that's an example for me. Kay, I'm not sure if you have anything you'd want to add about how design thinking and strategy affects financial inclusion.
Yeah, I can definitely just share, our framework that we use to approach any type of design problem or solution, whether it's for financial inclusion or not, just because I think it's such a fantastic tool to think through any problem in life. I also use it to think through my own personal challenges as well. But basically, we follow the design double diamond framework, right? So there's 4 different steps, and we found that this works really well for all of the initiatives that we've taken on. So using Fixa as an example. So there's 4 different steps. Number 1 is discovery. So the most important aspect to our work as designers is starting any project with curiosity. So when we open with discovery, we're going through user interviews. We're really taking on the position of a learner here, where we're asking not only the stakeholders, not only the clients, we're talking to their users, we're talking to their workers, we're talking to their employers, their employees, everyone who's interacting with them, investors, even, because those are also stakeholders, just to have a good understanding of what is the worldview of each of these different humans who interact with this client, right? What are their needs? What are their motivations? And then once we feel like we have a better sense of this ecosystem and how it functions together, then we move into the next stage, which is the definition. And that's where you really zero in on the focus of what this company wants, what this client needs. And usually this has something to do with their business goals, because if we're just designing a solution without tying it to a business goal, well, then you're just doing it for charity, right? There's not really an inherent business need. And as designers for financial inclusion, we need to be thinking about designing for sustainability, not only for the clients, but also for the communities that we're building with, right? So that's where we go into defining what is the problem. And that's where a lot of the insights will come out of. Maybe there's a key theme around, the relationship between health and financial wellness, right? Maybe there's a theme around needing more offline availability, right? Maybe there's something around cross-border transactions and how a lot of those people are transacting in a specific way, but we're not understanding it immediately, right? So defining what those challenges and design opportunities are before moving on to the stage that usually everyone wants to jump into, which is the designing phase. So this is where, now that you have a good understanding of your main character that you're designing for, right? Maybe it's a woman in a community in South Africa. Maybe it's, these freelancers in Ghana who are trying to, make ends meet and send money across the border to their family in Nigeria. Right now you have this main character, you have an area of focus, this specific problem that you want to solve for them. And now you finally go into the design, whether it's a mobile application, a website, a USSD platform. Maybe it's not even digital, right? Maybe it's actually just starting from community engagements. And then the last step is now hand over the development and delivery process to the clients, so that they now also have a clear understanding of where all of these design decisions are, because that handover part is extremely crucial to maintain the sustainability of that program. A lot of things that we've seen in the past is, without the handover and without the incorporation of key stakeholders from the team, a lot of times that's where these projects fall flat, because that's where you haven't designed enough systems and enough metrics for this program or this tool to run sustainably by itself, because you haven't engaged the community enough, you haven't engaged the stakeholders internally.
As I was listening to your answer, I couldn't help but think about the challenges that fintech companies face when designing financial services for underserved populations. How do you help guide them through that process? You obviously start with your design framework, but beyond that, what other tools or strategies do you bring to the table to ensure these solutions are both impactful and sustainable, given a wide range of expertise that Kumquat offers? How do you balance these different roles while staying true to your mission of championing financial inclusion?
There is a variety of tools that we bring to this, and I think that's one of the difficulties we run into as a company because it's really hard to describe the breadth of what we bring as a solution. Some ways we've described ourselves are as therapists for our clients because we're there as a thought partner and thinking, let me talk you through your problems. But some of the solutions we bring, for example, we work a lot in the internet freedom community, in protecting digital rights as well. And one of the ways we can help is by connecting different groups and projects that are doing the same thing. If we need design talent on the continent, K is so connected that we're always ensuring that we hire designers who come from marginalized groups, that we hire explicitly only from the continent, and that we're making sure that we're empowering people that we care about. We can connect a company that's needing support to talent. We bring our full selves to our jobs. And so when we are working with anyone, we are thinking of multiple ways we can help them. And it's through our designing, it's through helping them with their brand, it's helping with your positioning, it's helping you get your message out to people, it's building out the designs, it's doing the research with you, it's pushing back a little bit when we think, you're maybe not thinking this through fully and you need to take a step back and think about what's best for your client, your user, whoever it is. So we bring a lot of tools to the table in a variety of types of work. So that's marketing, brand, product design, but we also bring our full selves. So it's if we know someone we can connect you with that we know will empower your mission because we believe in what you're doing, we'll try and make that connection for you. There is this amorphous description of what we do, but really it is us being your champion in this space and helping you build a tool or a solution that's going to actually make an impact and make the world better.
For our listeners who may not be entirely familiar with the field, how does a fintech company connect the issue of internet freedom or digital rights? Could you break down the connection, particularly in the African context, where multiple actors and challenges come into play? And how does Kumquat specifically engage with or contribute to this intersection?
In Kumquat, we work with a variety of sectors. We've worked with climate, we've worked with financial inclusion. That is Kay and myself's background, working at Cash and Stitch Money. So that's something we're particularly passionate about, as finance is a major lever for change globally. But we've worked with HR, sourcing, helping people find employment. We've worked in digital rights as well, which is about protecting people's data. Data is becoming just as valuable as finance itself. And so, how do we enable it? It's an interesting balance of how we enable open banking, for example, while also protecting people's data. And that's something that, because of this breadth of experience and industries that we work with, we can bring context in and say, if we're building a fintech product with a company, we can say users need to be made aware of what data is going to be shared, what data of theirs is going to be shared, get their consent first, make sure that they know how to revoke access if they need to. How do we ensure that people can live with dignity and not be, tracked by repressive entities, right? So they're bringing that cross industry knowledge is how we can apply something like digital rights to financial inclusion and vice versa. Digital rights might say, don't share data with anyone, but it is important to give people access to the globe and to the global economy. So that is one of the ways we do that.
I find the relationship between digital rights, fintech, and consumer protection incredibly important, especially when it comes to privacy. Looking at the African continent, where regulations and practices vary widely, I'm curious about the current state of these discussions.
Mm.
For example, if I were to purchase a SIM card linked to a digital wallet like M-Pesa, how is my data being protected? What types of practices or safeguards are in place? And what conversations are happening around this issue? Additionally, how does design play a role in ensuring that users' personal data is protected?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the complexity of operating in the African market in general, right? Because whether you're buying a SIM card in Sierra Leone versus the Congo versus South Africa versus Egypt, all of those experiences are going to be very, very different, with huge differences across, regulations, compliance. And then for a continent that's, rapidly getting online, but there are still huge gaps and huge fragmentation in access to digital literacy as well as financial literacy, right? This is where that conversation of internet freedom and financial inclusion goes hand in hand for me, because it's all around security and the awareness of security, right? There's a huge population on the continent that are not financially literate or have very low financial literacy. A lot of them, it's also the same types of populations that also have low digital inclusion, right? So now that we're seeing cybercrime on the rise, a lot of the education that needs to be done to teach people around protecting their phones, their digital devices, but also their finances on their devices, a lot of that has huge overlaps. So that's where that conversation around digital rights, consumer protection, also financial literacy and inclusion are so intertwined, because a lot of times I think the mistakes that some people make is that because in the urban areas, so many Africans have phones, smartphones, mobile phones, laptops, that they have that right amount of tech literacy, whereas that's usually often a huge hurdle that we have to jump through, especially when it comes to helping them understanding, simple concepts like two-factor authentication, creating a strong password that you shouldn't share with anyone else, how to create something that's secure and how to navigate this digital world. And of course, finances is, critical to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Within this field, what emerging technologies or practices have you seen playing a crucial role in Africa, or even more specifically in South Africa? Are there innovations that stand out in shaping the future of fintech or digital rights?
I mean, South Africa is interesting because it is more banked than a lot of other African countries. So there is a bit of a different mindset. There's a lot of card usage, etc. But for the continent as a whole, I think one of the trends we're seeing is embedded finance. So having financial services embedded into other platforms such as e-commerce and that sort of thing. I think there is going to be a growing space for innovation in terms of AI, which everyone's obviously talking about, but also working on the blockchain. So decentralized finance is growing as well. There might be use cases for DAOs being used to uplift communities by people putting resources together. There are so many emerging technologies that I think the most important practice that we need to have playing a role in this financial inclusion is addressing the informational asymmetry that there is. Because technology is changing so rapidly, that there is always an asymmetry of information and thus an asymmetry of power with people. So that's something I think is a practice that needs to be embedded in all emerging technologies. And that's where something like AI can come in, enabling people to understand what they're signing up for when they get a loan, enabling someone to understand what it means to share their data, enabling someone to know what a piece of technology does. There are ways that we can then apply these technologies ethically, but it's about ensuring that we address that power disparity. That to me is what is the most crucial thing to address as we move forward with financial inclusion.
I completely agree. Kay, do you have something to add to that, or?
Yeah, maybe hopefully this is just like a nugget that's helpful to think about for some of the listeners. Some of the key things that we've seen in practice, or maybe key themes that we've seen when building out a product or a solution on the continent, is I think there's three things that really have stood out to us. So it's sometimes helpful to take a step back and think about, when you're building a product for a market as fragmented and as diverse as the African markets, are we also seeing something similar? So number one is simplicity, right? You're designing for such a huge variety of users that this is one of the first things that we often come to when we're thinking through, a redesign, right? Or a refresh, building out a wireframe, because there's this concept in design of when you're designing for better accessibility, you end up designing for everyone. So of course, at the crux of that is simplicity. So when users adopt products that are intuitive and require minimal learning curves, you're automatically going to make that more accessible to a much wider population. And sometimes as designers, as entrepreneurs, we get lost in the weeds of thinking like, oh, this feature would be super cool. Like this would be really fancy. What if we add all these little flares where that's really not necessary, right? Especially in a continent where there's so many different types of users, behaviors that you're trying to build for. Number two, like we talked about a little bit more, is cultural relevance. And a lot of times that cultural relevance, it doesn't only involve technological, interaction and engagement. There's also a larger human and more communal context that a lot of these startups and, other companies will need to take into account, right? Maybe there's a human, cultural blocker that's preventing someone to access because maybe there's something, maybe there's like a cultural practice, or maybe there's a community aspect that's preventing them from being able to use your application more effectively, right? And then number three, like Lori talked about, interoperability is crucial. We're seeing embedded finance come up as a theme. So something that we've seen over and over again is that financial services have to integrate with existing mobile money platforms instead of trying to replace them, because it is such a fragmented continent and market. The days of, being the next M-Pesa and taking a monopoly of the market, that's long, long over, right? Everyone's trying to jump on that train now. So the Apple method of cutting everyone out probably isn't going to work on a market here. What we've seen is that companies who have decided to be interoperable across network, across telcos, those are the ones who succeed.
So I do have a question. What's next for you guys? Are there any upcoming initiatives you focused on? Like, what are you excited about?
I think there is a lot that we're excited about, and often our excitement stems from the projects we're working with and our excitement to be able to empower their missions. But some things that we're looking at internally as Kumquat is, how do we open source the access to our knowledge, essentially? How do we make this type of thinking more common when anyone is designing a product, right? Whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a corporate or a startup, how do we ensure that this is part of the process when you are designing something new? So we're looking at productizing our consulting frameworks and doing this, especially starting small with what we know best, fintech startups. How do we implement best practices? So for UX, for financial accessibility, maybe there's a toolkit we can provide. How do we make it easy for you to make decisions on behalf of the user and become their advocate? And then there is a lot of work that we're already doing right now, partnering with impact-driven accelerators and funds to help startups design products that will bring African innovation to the world. Part of partnering with these impact-driven accelerators, for example, is Kokayi recently led a really incredible workshop with Google's accelerator in Africa to help their founders understand how to tell a story, how to build a story by making your end user the hero. And the subject matter of this was using her experience at DreamWorks to actually apply that narrative, the hero's journey, to your product, your user being the hero. And so that storytelling framework is something that we'd like to apply to other accelerators if they're interested, even nonprofits. I think there's a lot of space for anyone who wants to drive financial inclusion, even if you yourself are not making a profit. But our experience in these talks really sort of can create a light bulb moment in anyone. And that's really exciting to see the real world impact of that type of work, those types of partnerships.
Yeah, I think that was a great recap and probably touches on, our mission is twofold. Number one is to amplify all the amazing ideas coming out of the continent, right? And using our frameworks, using our tools, using our methodologies to refine them and then bring product market fits to whatever these founders are developing. The second part of our mission is also leveraging the incredible amount of creative talents on the continent, technical talents, design talent on the continent, to be able to think through and design solutions for ourselves. And I'm saying ourselves as Africans because something that you see a lot of times is a lot of these solutions are built by foreigners. Ironically, I am one of them. I know.
You're not. You've been here for long enough. 10 years makes you part of us.
Thank you.
The word foreigner is like a very relative concept.
Exactly.
Thank you. The reality that I want us to move towards is one where Africans have the tools, they have the ability, they have, probably most importantly, the global opportunities to be able to build and solve solutions for ourselves as a continent. We're not relying on external funding. We're able to generate value for ourselves. We have the tools. We've seen what people in Silicon Valley look like and do, right? We've seen the way that they like to think about their solutions, their designs. And I would love for this continent to be able to say, okay, cool, we've seen that. Good for you. We're going to do this our own way, right? I think the markets in Nigerians and Kenyans have done this in an amazing way where they've really been able to take a look at what else is out there and start bringing more opportunities abroad home. That's what I would like to do for Kumquat, which is leveraging the design talent, the technical talent, the development talent, and the business analysis talents of our contractors, our employees, everyone to be able to think through these solutions critically and to really start making a difference for all these different founders, championing financial inclusion and a better world and a better continent.
This is actually one of the things that piqued my interest about Kumquat. From the moment I met you and as I learned more about your work, I found it fascinating how you position yourself in this space. It made me want to have this conversation to dive a bit deeper and also understand the subject matter better. I wanted to say that I love how each question naturally leads into the next one, so I have one final question for you. This is something we ask all of our guests, and it's about envisioning the future. We tend to say it's not about imagining flying cars or like a Back to the Future scenario, but rather in the next 10 to 20 years. What do you believe the future of digital finance and fintech will look like? I mean, feel free to dream big as well. I don't want to stop you.
My vision for the future of financial inclusion over the next, let's say, 20 years is moving from, a finance-based economy to a human-centered economy where we're measuring wealth by well-being instead of GDP.
Wow.
So I want us to measure wealth by community well-being instead of GDP. And that means we're looking at what are the development outcomes instead of financial services. People don't technically need more financial services. People need to be able to live with dignity, live with grace, like you've said. And so I envision a future where we're focusing on benefits and outcomes like housing, education, and healthcare instead of just GDP. We're looking at alternative credit scoring, innovative collateral for credit. We're looking at how do we empower marginalized parts of our community. Should we support more women entrepreneurs because they are, in effect, often build more profitable businesses? Basically, what I want is for us to look at community wellness, community well-being as the measure of social mobility. So if the community is being built through communal ownership, regeneration, being able to be autonomous and resilient, and really focusing on the context of finance rather than just the money aspect of it. That's what I hope for financial inclusion over the next 10 to 20 years.
Oh, I love that one. I agree with it. Kayi, do you have one?
Yeah, mine is simple. I guess if I'm visualizing it, I'm Africa centric. So I'm just thinking about the continent right now. But for Africa to have a strong baseline of socioeconomic health, so like what Lori talked about, education, finances, economics, there's a strong base and foundation for that. And then people also, men, women, children, whoever, they have the financial agency and the education to be able to shape their own financial future into whatever they want it to be. I think it's really as simple as that. A society where people have a healthy baseline to fall back to, but then also the ability and the knowledge and the critical thinking to be able to understand how financial markets work, understand how to build and plan for their own personal finances, understanding, how do I become an entrepreneur, right? Like, how do I develop that mindset to really go for something knowing that I'm going to have to make hard decisions and it's going to be tough, but I'm living in an economy and in a nation that I can trust to support me as a businessman, a businesswoman. That's what I would love, is for Africa to become the continent where it's easy for people to have a simple and fulfilling life if they would like that, but then also to be the entrepreneur, to be the crazy person who goes out and takes a big risk and knows that, okay, this is possible. I don't have corruption to deal with. No one's going to be siphoning money from me. Tax rates are fair. But I also have a strong foundation of financial education and economic education and an entrepreneurial mindset. So I know how to choose a different future for myself if that's what I want.
Both answers really complement each other. It all begins with the concept of financial health, which naturally incorporates financial literacy, because without that foundation, true financial well-being is impossible. It's about having a sense of security and the ability to step forward without fear, and the confidence to make financial decisions that support long-term stability. I completely agree with what you just said. To me, this is the baseline for building a healthy future and creating a sustainable path forward. Thank you so much.
I think we'll see so much innovation if people are not afraid that they won't eat. If they take a chance, then we'll see innovation. We'll see things changing. We'll see problems being solved, and that's what I love about Kay's answer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much for this. And a big thank you to the both of you for being part of the Future Money podcast. It's been such an insightful conversation, and I truly appreciate you sharing both of your perspectives.
Thank you so much.
So much for having us. This was so much fun.
And this brings us to the end of this episode of the Future Money podcast. A huge thank you to Larisha and Kokayi for sharing their insights and experiences. Today's conversation highlighted the importance of creating solutions that are not only accessible, but also culturally relevant and empowering. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who are passionate about digital financial inclusion and innovation. So thank you for listening, and until next time, keep imagining new possibilities for the future.